Testing 1, 2, 3.
I introduce it, Mira presents the results of the study, and then there's a panel.
Testing 1.
Here now, so I'll just ask you probably one question each. In 40 minutes, there's no...
Dear guests, welcome to the UAE Pavilion at COP28. We would like to bring to your attention that the following session will be broadcasted via live stream on our channels. We seek your kind support and mindfulness during the presentations. Thank you for understanding and enjoy the session.
Hello. Good morning, and thank you for joining us here today. I'm Sheila Watson. I'm Deputy Director of the FIA Foundation, UK-based philanthropy, but globally facing, which works on safe and sustainable mobility. We have a very short session this morning at which we want to present to you some work which the Real Urban Emissions Initiative, TRUE, has been doing with Abu Dhabi Environment Agency, testing the emissions of vehicles on the roads and identifying gross emitters and talking at the beginning of a conversation about the sorts of policy changes which could flow from this level of understanding. So I was going to describe TRUE, but we have with us Tim Dolman from ICCT. So Tim, I'm going to ask you if you would just explain to the audience what TRUE is.
Thank you, Sheila. So the TRUE initiative was started in 2017 with the goal of providing policymakers and decision makers with information about the real world emissions of cars driving in their cities and on their roads. And really the inception for the TRUE initiative really came from the Dieselgate scandal, where we saw that laboratory testing was not telling the whole picture of real world vehicle emissions. So oftentimes cars being driven on roads had emissions many times higher than regulatory limits and many times higher than emissions measured in the laboratory. So working with the FIA Foundation, we've worked with cities around the world to collect real world emissions data and provide that information to city officials and policymakers in order to develop better strategies for controlling the emissions from the highest emitting vehicles in the fleet. And so far we've worked in cities around the world, Europe, North America, Indonesia, India, and we're very happy today to be talking about the most recent work the TRUE initiative has been doing with Abu Dhabi.
Thank you so much, Tim. Yes, we are. We're absolutely delighted at the TRUE initiative that we've had this opportunity to work in what is pretty path-breaking in the region, I believe, the first real-world emissions testing project. And I'd now like to introduce Mira Mohammed Khaled Nayev Ahara, who will present the results of the study. And you're from the Abu Dhabi Environment Agency, so it's perfect that you're here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll stand. I think it will make things better for everyone. Before I get started, again, my name is Mira Harara. I'm an air quality analyst at the Environment Agency Abu Dhabi. I'd like to welcome you all here today to present the results of the remote sensing of real-world vehicle emissions from Abu Dhabi. First, I'd like to thank our partners, the HEATS, ICCT, the FIA Foundation, Department of Municipalities and Transport, the Integrated Transport Center, and Abu Dhabi Police. Before we get started, I just wanted to highlight the objectives of this project and how this work came to be. Because of the camera, okay. All right, sorry for that. Guess I'm sitting. All right, so I lost my train of thought. So yeah, we've worked on several projects in the agency when it comes to monitoring, and obviously as an environmental body, we always care to try to find the most appropriate solutions and try to understand, before anything, our environment and environmental quality. So upon our research, we've noticed that the transportation sector contributes to about 34% of NOx emissions and about 17% of PM2.5. So we've decided to look into technologies that could help us deepen on our understanding on to what's really happening out there real world, at real time, and at different environmental conditions. So we've stumbled upon remote sensing technologies, and with the help of heat, we were able to deploy two of those remote sensing technologies in our streets, and we were able to gather emission data via spectroscopy, and we were able to estimate like a list of emissions such as NOx, PM, CO, relative to CO2. The measurement campaign spanned a period of 15 days, by which 6 sites were covered all over the Emirate of Abu Dhabi, including Al Ain. We've gathered about little over 108,000 measurements. These measurements were validated due to the presence of the emissions data as well as the license plate data. After data processing and validation, we were left with about 83,000 usable data measurements. Our focus was light-duty vehicles due to them being the majority of the fleet. Moving forward, for you to understand this work better, it's good for you to know where the UAE stands in terms of transportation standards. So as of 2018, the UAE has a minimum standard of Euro 4. The European Union, the EU, has introduced Euro 6D in 2020. To characterize our fleet further, we saw that 80% of the fleet is occupied by private vehicles, meaning private ownership, and 16% of the fleet was taxis, and just 4% was public. So we've seen different fuel types. We've seen cars running on diesel, petrol, gas, natural gas, and hybrid, meaning petrol and electricity. So we first looked into NOx emissions from LDVs. So we wanted to see how each type of fuel performs in terms of its NOx and its average vehicle age. We've noticed that diesel car LDVs, I'll be using LDVs for light-duty vehicles. So diesel LTVs were the oldest and the most emitting out of the 4 groups of fuel type. Public LDVs, on the other hand, were seen to emit more NOx than private LDVs for petrol fuel types. And interestingly enough, taxis running on CNG and natural gas were seen to emit more NOx emissions than other fuel types. Of course, for public LDVs, we've seen that the difference between public and private cars are meant to be driven more, and the frequency of usage and the mileage is far higher than private ones. So therefore, they would have a higher share in the NOx emissions. Moving forward, we decided to look into the taxi fleet, and we wanted to understand the characteristics of the taxi fleets in terms of its NOx emissions. We've noticed that out of the 16% of the taxi fleet, 84% of that are Toyota Camrys. So we decided to look into the Toyota Camry a little bit more. So Toyota Camrys are either running on petrol, natural gas, or they're hybrid vehicles. We've noticed that the majority of the fleet complies with Euro 3, whereas we've seen that petrol and natural gas driven taxis are largely responsible for NOx. The petrol and CNG models of years 2018 and 2020 had emissions 3 to 12 times higher than the regulatory limit. However, newer models further improved those NOx emissions, and this shows that age and mileage are key factors when it comes to reducing emissions. Of course, hybrid was within the NOx limit, with the NOx regulatory limit, so that was good to see. However, we've noticed for Toyota Camrys of models pre-2018, we've noticed that they were responsible for more than half of the total NOx emissions. So when it comes to looking into LDVs run on diesel without taxis, so diesel and petrol, if we had a scenario by which the UAE implements Euro 6, it's just a scenario. So we saw that if we were to implement Euro 6, we'll be cutting out half of our NOx emissions when it comes to vehicles running on diesel. And we would get about 45% less NOx emissions for vehicles that comply with Euro 6D running on petrol. So it's quite a significant decrease. Looking into PM emissions, we've kind of compared how we're performing against the latest models in Europe. We've seen that we're emitting 10 times more due to us still being on the Euro 4 standard. The implementation of Euro 6 would decrease our emissions by 90%, and that is for PM. This is mainly due to the diesel particulate filter that became mandatory due to the increase of the standard. This results in obviously limiting the PM emissions, so it would drop it quite significantly. So moving on to buses, so we wanted to look into how buses perform in terms of their NOx emissions. We've noticed that buses running on Euro 6, they would reduce approximately 71% of NOx emissions. And if we were to go a little bit to a higher standard, which is Euro 6D, we would get 90% of NOx emission reduced. We've seen on our streets that the ITC, Integrated Transport Center, has deployed Euro 6 buses in 2019 and 2020, by which significant reductions were seen on Abu Dhabi roads. Again, when it comes to buses and PM, we've seen that Euro 6 will be able to, as we've compared to the models in Europe, would be able to kind of have a almost 50% decrease of PM emissions. So from our research and from the results of this study, we've come up with certain recommendations that we think would be useful to have on our streets. So the obvious one is to have Euro 6. It will cut down NOx and particulate matter emissions by a factor of 10. Another recommendation is to ban second-hand or used vehicles that are below Euro 4 for petrol vehicles and below Euro 6 for diesel vehicles. And we recommend the ITC to continue doing their good work in terms of purchasing buses that have a Euro 6 minimum. And we recommend having a stricter limitation when it comes to taxi age, sticking to that 5-year mark to reduce the amount of NOx being emitted. And electrification of fleets is highly recommended since it's the fastest way to reduce harmful NOx emissions. That will be all. I can answer your questions right after the session. Thank you. Back to you, Sheila.
I think we've only got one functioning mic. There we go. Thank you so much, Mira, for those very detailed comments. And I hope that people can see that the kind of quality of work that can come from this sort of testing and the detail that it presents to people and the options, therefore, for policy change that are there are really worth considering. So we'll turn now to our panel, and we're very lucky to have with us Ruqayya Mohammed, who's section head of the Air Quality and Nuisance Unit of the Environment Agency of Abu Dhabi, Sean Maguire, who's Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Clean Air Fund, and then, as I mentioned before, Tim Dolman from ICCT. And although we are turning to you, I'm just going to ask if we can show our true film first, because although we heard a quick synopsis, Tim, I think this film gives people a good sense of what True is all about. So, roll film, as they say, please. And that never works, does it? It never, ever does it ever work. It always takes a couple of goes. I think if we're struggling with it, we can just go into our panel conversation and maybe play it at the end, if that's okay. Great. Why don't we do that? So, Sean, may I turn to you first? You have a great overview at the Clean Air Fund of the sorts of broader issues involved in considering air quality implications in cities. Vehicles are only part of that. Could you perhaps tell us a little bit about the work of the Clean Air Fund and how the sort of work that True's doing is supporting, helping, contributing to your work?
Yeah, thanks very much, Sheila, and it's a delight to be here, and congratulations to Abu Dhabi for beginning to go down the road of really understanding the impact of the vehicle fleet ultimately on population health. So the Clean Air Fund was established a few years ago as a philanthropic initiative to address the issue of air pollution globally. It was noticed that there were lots of organizations working specifically on climate, lots working specifically on health, but no one organization focused solely on air pollution, which was a surprise given the abundant statistics that there are out there on both the health and the climate impact of air pollution. Air pollution is deadly. It kills or contributes to the death of very many people each year. I mean, there's a range of statistics out there, but the most conservative suggest that air pollution kills up or contributes to the deaths of up to 7 million people a year, and considerably more than that suffer from ill health, asthma, strokes, lung cancer, lung disease, all because of what we breathe. Progress has been made on air pollution in some parts of the world, and the first thing you have to do when you want to kind of address air pollution is you have to understand where it's coming from. So in many countries, there's a good emission inventory, so we really understand where the air pollution is coming from. So people have realized that you need to put filters and scrubbers on your power stations. You need to, shut down coal-fired power. You need to move to electric sources of heat and light and power. But one of the big issues remaining is still road transport. The contribution of road transport to air pollution and therefore to the damage to our health. So the Clean Air Fund does a lot of work in cities around the world, working with city authorities to address the impact that road transport has on community health. And we're delighted to partner with the True Initiative to do so in many cities around the world. The True Initiative has helped us and helped mayors and city authorities get a really accurate sense of where the air pollution is coming from, what types of vehicles, and that has helped city authorities really identify the right types of policy measures. The policy measures that are cost efficient and that are effective, and policy measures that can then be well explained to the public. Because it's really important that you bring the public with you when you ask them to make changes. When you ask them to make changes to their fleets, it will cost people money. People will have to upgrade their vehicles and change their vehicles, and you want people to understand why. You want people to understand that it's for their benefit, for the benefit of their health and the health of their children. So the work of True is invaluable to give us the kind of data that helps make that argument work. And there are many, many other policy solutions besides changing vehicle fleets, but changing vehicle fleets is a fantastic area to start.
Thank you so much, Sean. It's definitely a great pleasure that we have done so much work together. And I think for us here working with Abu Dhabi, which has been a huge honor and a great learning experience for those of us in the True Initiative. There are, I think, many options and ideas to consider as we go forward with this data in hand. So, Ruqayyah, I would be really interested as a representative of the Abu Dhabi Environment Agency, perhaps to hear a little bit about the context into which this work fits, your wider work, and also where you think those policy options might go in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, my name is Ruqayyah Mohammed. I'm the manager for the Air Quality and Nuisance section. Thanks for giving us this opportunity to talk about our project. And I'm pretty much going to repeat some of the things that have been said by the other panelists. So to me, the context of this is the best way to address these challenges, to have set up an appropriate and integrated monitoring program. This is key as a very first step. And as we know, surface transport, like has been mentioned, is one of the key contributors and one of the key challenges when it comes to air pollution. And we know this because its impact on health is much more immediate, because the sources of pollutions are in the spaces that we live in, we work, and we play. So for us in the Environment Agency, of course, our motto is, what you can't measure, you can't manage. So set up an ambient air quality monitoring program, so you know the state of air quality and the type of pollution in terms of concentrations and types of pollutions that the public is exposed to. As a next step, I would say set up a regular compilation of air emissions inventories. And in this way, you can tell what the key contributions are in terms of percentages from the transport sector compared to other sectors. So once you've pinned that down, and Mira mentioned some of the data in terms of what transport contributes in terms of PM2.5 and NOx, for example. Once you have this kind of data in place, then you can zoom in and do this kind of study that we did here with remote sensing, where now you're looking at different classes of vehicles and different technologies in terms of their contributions to emissions. And as Mira presented here, we can see different classes have significantly different contribution. And then in this way, you can have much more targeted mitigation measures. I would say the next step is in terms of the robust data that you're going to get out of all these monitoring activities can then help in establishing a baseline for policies and regulations and in designing effective mitigation measures. Last but not least, I would say stakeholder engagement. You have to absolutely share this data and information with all the key government entities that are responsible for addressing this challenge from different perspectives within their mandates. And this kind of data can help everybody be on the same page and then have a much more, I would say, synergized and integrated approach to mitigating and developing policies and regulations that are evidence-based and science-based. So that's pretty much what would be my approach.
Thank you so much, Rukaya. I couldn't think of a better explanation of the objectives of the True Initiative, actually, than the one you just gave about integrated approaches and working with stakeholders and sharing good science-based data. So, yes, I wish I'd written it all down. I may come back to you for a quote for our promo materials. It's great to have that level of positivity about the work. And Tim, if I may just turn to you, we heard a little in all of our contributions this morning about the sorts of policy options that can result from work like the work that True's done here. So in other cities where we've worked, from Seoul to London, from Brussels to New York, could you share with us some of the other policy options and ideas that people have pursued, having worked with True and had this very targeted data to work with?
Yeah, thanks, Sheila. And I will maybe chime in with the slogan that we can use: what you can't measure, you can't manage. I love that. I think that's such a great approach and fits well with the ethos of the True Initiative. So I think we saw from Mira's presentation just the richness of remote sensing data and the richness of the data that can come from the True Initiative. We can see what vehicles, whether they're diesel vehicles, petrol vehicles, CNG vehicles, how the emissions compare, how new policies and regulations are impacting emissions. So implementing Euro 3, Euro 4, Euro 6 standards, how that can target the highest emitting vehicles in the fleet. And I think in our perspective through True, we found that working with cities around the world, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. So that's another thing about the True data, is that you really can see what's happening in a city and what are the vehicles that really need to be targeted with policy actions. So just to give a few examples of the ways in which we've connected the True Initiative's data and data collection to some of the actions that cities officials and city governments have been able to take to tackle their air pollution problems and control emissions from road transport. I'll start with the first True Initiative project, which was in our pilot city of London. So it's the first city where True conducted a remote sensing project and worked closely with the City of London to help them understand what the data is telling them and to connect the data to some of the policies that they were thinking about to try to clean up their on-road vehicle fleet and hasten the transition to zero-emission vehicles. And one specific fleet that we found to have very high emissions were taxi emissions. So similar to the findings here in Abu Dhabi, we found that the diesel taxi fleet in London, I believe, Sheila, you might know the data, I think it had 7 times higher NOx emissions than comparable passenger cars. So taxis are used a lot more than a comparable passenger car. So not only do you have higher emissions, but you have these vehicles being driven more. So you're just compounding those issues of excess emissions. So one of the things that we were able to do with London is to support the mayor's initiative to hasten the transition to zero-emission capable taxi fleets and to phase out the higher emitting diesel taxis that had previously been used in London. So I think that that's an example we like to point to with the True Initiative, kind of how the data that we collect can be connected directly to policy options. Another, I think, really good success story for the True Initiative and for engagement with cities comes from our work in the city of Warsaw, Poland. So Poland struggles with very poor air quality, and in Warsaw in particular, vehicle emissions play an important part in that air quality issues that the city is facing. So the True Initiative did a project there in 2019 and came up with clear recommendations for the city about how they could move forward with a low emission zone. So really a strong policy to limit access to the city for those highest emitting vehicles in the fleet. So looking at vehicles that maybe have 10 times higher emissions than other vehicles in the fleet and actively trying to limit their access to a certain part of the city to try to improve air quality. And we're very happy to see that Warsaw is now moving forward, has announced this low emission zone policy, and are now using True Initiative data to help them design that in an effective way to make sure that it's based on the data, based on the science, and effectively targeting those high emission vehicles in the fleet. So I think those are 2 examples that really showcase the breadth of engagement with the True Initiative and the types of policies that we think that the data can really support and provide evidence for.
Thank you very much, Tim. And of course, the discussion about True and the context for True has been air quality, but of course we're here at the COP, and the COP is about climate. And although we're having a great time celebrating each other and complimenting each other, and which is exactly, of course, how it should be, this is not an easy area in which to pursue change. Vehicles and vehicle ownership and the use of vehicles, how to describe that. That can be a very personal issue for people, and it can be an area which is quite contentious. So Sean, I'm very interested because, of course, Clean Air Fund works all around the world in different geographies. How do you see that debate playing out? The particular, well, both the connection to climate, is that helpful or is it actually hindering the pursuit of clean air work? And are you seeing differences in the different places you work in terms of how people are receptive to this sort of change?
Yeah, those are two really interesting questions. I think you know, we have a twin challenge, but they are inextricably linked around how do we keep our planet healthy and how do we keep our people healthy. And by acting on air pollution, you can work on both. Now, obviously, if we're still using internal combustion engines, we are still contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. Vehicle fleet efficiency and cleaner fuels is good for air pollution. It's not yet really making a dent on the climate issue. So really the gold standard in this area is fleet electrification. But you know, there's a mountain to climb there. There's roughly 1.5 billion internal combustion engine vehicles on the world's roads at the moment. And so far, there are 20 million plug-in electric vehicles on the world's roads. But there is hope. In China, last year, 4.4 million plug-in electric vehicles were sold. And electric vehicles are the future, and the future is just around the corner. So, you know, smart governments are, you know, putting in place the tax and regulatory incentives to encourage full electrification. And that's really where the future is in terms of really dynamic action on air pollution and dynamic action with relation to vehicles on climate. Now, in terms of the question of sort of public acceptability, yes, as I mentioned earlier, change can be hard, and people, can have a very personal association with their vehicles. And I think in some parts of the world, Tim, you talked about low emission zones, and that's really restricting access of certain types of vehicles to certain places. And in Europe, that's pretty much accepted as a thing that you can and should do. There are around about 350, clean air zones or low emission zones of different types in Europe. Ranging from like full pedestrianization through to kind of like just the dirtiest, oldest, heaviest vehicles not being allowed in. But people have sort of come to realize that makes sense. That in a city you have to share space. So you need to car drivers need to share space with the woman pushing her pram down the street. And everyone's requirements and needs and rights need to be respected. So there's become a new balance has been established. Between the different kind of needs and rights of individuals. And I think that's, in different cities around the world, that conversation needs to start around, what is space used for? And who has the rights to those different types of space? And who has the right to kind of, to pollute somebody else's space or not? And I think, the beauty of the true data is it gives you a really empirical starting point to begin those conversations. And then you can bring in the health conversation and the health data and say, people, really, is this the kind of city we want to live in? Is this the space we want to live in? Or do we want to improve it for everybody? And I think if you start down that conversation and you prepare people and you bring them into the conversation and you consult them, then you can make change happen. But you need to give it time and you need to be very thoughtful about that engagement process.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you. And those wise words, I think, match to your wise words, Ruqayyah, about the need to include stakeholders and the wider community in any discussions going forward. One of the things that, and Mira, this is a question to you too, one of the things that we very much pride ourselves on in the True Initiative is the independence of the data, is the fact that we do the work, we find out what we find, and we share it very openly. And I wonder, does that help? Does it help in the process going forward that this data has been generated in this way? And do you think that will add something to the debate that I know you are hoping to have and planning to have with, of course, the many other agencies who need to have a voice in this process? So this data coming, as it were, with external advice, is that a helpful part of the process, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I continue, I want to mention something that you just talked about, Volkswagen Gate. This project, to me, one of the most important aspects at the very beginning is we always emphasize that we absolutely have to have UAE-specific, not just Abu Dhabi-specific, UAE-specific emissions factors for air emissions as well as greenhouse gases. And we know that a car that has been tested in Berlin or in France may not show the same characteristics in terms of emissions profiles here in UAE and the GCC. And so the first step is we needed to have this information so that we can come up with the best emissions inventories, whether it's GHG or air emissions. And now we are confident that from this data, when we plug in these numbers into our modeling systems, whether it's for environmental impact assessments, scenario building, and so on and so forth, the uncertainty is reduced. So that's the first step, that we are confident about the data. And like I said, this is data that we can share with other government entities, with researchers also, of course, in academic institutions and so forth. And having input from outside, of course, strengthens our position because we have other people who've done this kind of work in different parts of the world, looking at our data and helping us compile our data and giving us insights that maybe we would be missing if we're doing it all by ourselves. So absolutely, doing it in this very comprehensive way absolutely adds value and adds the confidence that we have in our data and in sharing it with other entities and internationally.
Thank you so much, Ruqayyah. Mira, did you want to add anything to that?
She covered all.
Yeah, she covered it beautifully. This is a tendency to do that. I wonder now if we can show the film. We think we might be able to run it and it'll work.
Our job is to collect and publish real-world emissions data and to work with cities to help them inform their policy making. It can really help them properly design city-specific policies if they have the real-world data from their cities. And it can also help them identify specific fleets that they want to target.
Cities face unprecedented public health challenges. 9 out of 10 of us are breathing dangerously polluted air, which can cause asthma, strokes, heart attacks, and dementia, with young minds and bodies especially at risk.
Leaders and policymakers need to listen to young people when we are speaking out about this, when we're taking a stand, because it's our bodies that are being hurt, it's our lives that are on the line, and we know what needs to be done, and so do policymakers. They're just refusing to implement the ambitious action that we need.
Road vehicle emissions are a significant contributor to dirty air, threatening both human health and our planet.
It's really important to talk about air quality and climate change together, because very often they have the same cause, and that's burning fossil fuels. Fossil fuels causes about 2/3 of outdoor air pollution. So where the cause is the same, the solutions can also be the same, like clean public transport, more walking and cycling, and electric vehicles.
Many cities are unaware of the true scale of vehicle pollution. They might lack insights on vehicle emissions or how cars, taxis, buses and motorcycles each affect air quality. The Dieselgate scandal laid bare that vehicles emit far more on the road than when approved during lab testing. Cities need to understand what vehicles are really emitting on their streets. True offers independent, transparent testing, analysis and modelling. It provides the data to help to identify challenges and how we face them, with policies like low emission zones, electric vehicle transitions, public transport and active mobility strategies.
Understanding where the sources of emissions are will then really help target policies, and that's really something that we want to make sure that every city understands. So True has been really helpful in understanding the key sources of our emissions, and we understood that, for example, that the black cabs in London at the time were really contributing a huge amount to our air pollution in London. So when we set the policy, we introduced a policy in 2018 to only license zero-emission capable taxis, so no more diesel taxis. And that has progressively meant that we have now half of our fleet are zero-emission capable or better.
Globally, cities can understand similar situations across the world and act on the information we have to make the right choices and create cleaner, safer cities for all.
تلتزم إمارة أبو ظبي بالحفاظ على البيئة بتبني تكنولوجيا مبتكرة في مراقبة جودة الهواء، ومن خلال التعاون المشترك بين هيئة البيئة أبو ظبي ومبادرة ترو تم تحليل الملوثات الصادرة من وسائل النقل عبر الاستشعار عن بعد، مما يجعل مدينة أبو ظبي الأولى في الشرق الأوسط في استخدام هذه التقنية، والذي بدوره سيساهم في صنع القرارات اللازمة للحد من انبعاثات المركبات والحفاظ على صحة الإنسان.
So I hope that gave a little more context even to what we've been talking about today and what True is trying to do globally. I have to reiterate what a great pleasure and honour it has been to work with the Abu Dhabi Environment Agency, to cooperate in this way, in this very special and very important part of the world. I think Sean said it rather beautifully, that we have to keep our planet healthy and our people healthy, and True is looking to make a contribution to that by doing what Ruqaiya said, counting what it is we need to change. So going forward, we hope that the collaboration and the conversation will continue. We remain available to support as best we can, and we wish you a great deal of good luck with the work that you take forward with your other agencies and partners. And thank you to all of the panellists for taking part today, Sean, Ruqaiya, Tim and Mira. Thank you so much. And to you for attending. Photo.